A series on understanding Putin and the war in Ukraine. If we catch them in the toilet, we'll waste them in the outhouse. When Russia's new Prime Minister Vladimir Putin hurled this threat at Chechen separatists in September 1999, few believed he could deliver on the promise. At the time, Russia was in turmoil, and the public widely saw this as just more political grandstanding from another short-lived prime minister trying to shore up his position. However, in the months that followed, Putin used ruthless force to complete a task widely seen as impossible during the Yeltsin era. The military gamble, known as the Second Chechen War, far from turning Putin into the next scapegoat as the script predicted, instead became the victory that paved his path to the presidency. With Russia's economy in ruins, its army demoralized, and its society gripped by despair, what magic did Putin conjure to tame the ferocious Chechens in such a short time? To answer that, we must first return to the conflict that brought shame upon all of Russia, the First Chechen War. The humiliation of the First Chechen War. The war's origins lie in the twilight of the Soviet Union. It wasn't just the leaders of the former Soviet republics who dreamed of ruling their own nations. Some regional power brokers within Russia were also plotting to carve out their own domains. In Chechnya, the leader of the nationalist movement, former Soviet Air Force General Zohar Dudayev, seized the opportunity to launch a rebellion. He overthrew the local Soviet government and, in November 1991, unilaterally declared Chechnya's independence. After the Soviet collapse, Russian President Boris Yeltsin was busy dealing with domestic political struggles and the messy aftermath of economic shock therapy. He initially took a hands-off approach to Chechnya, but allowing the situation to fester would inevitably lead to separatism spreading. After stabilizing his domestic position, Yeltsin finally decided in 1994 to send in troops. Although Russia had been weakened by the Soviet breakup, Chechnya was just a tiny republic in the Caucasus. Everyone assumed that even a weakened Russia could easily crush Chechnya. It would be over in a flash. This dismissive attitude was the consensus among Russia's top leadership. The defense minister at the time, Pavel Grachev, even boasted that he could solve the problem in 2 hours with just one airborne regiment. The reality was a catastrophe. The Russian army not only paid the price of at least 5,700 dead to capture the city of Grozny, but was then humiliatingly driven out during a Chechen counteroffensive in 1996. Desperate to stop the bleeding and secure his re-election, Yeltsin was forced to sign the humiliating Khasavyurt Accord, which granted Chechnya de facto independence. The region descended into anarchy, becoming a breeding ground for crime, kidnapping, and extremism. Warlords who rose to prominence during the war grew increasingly radical, forging ties with Islamic extremist groups. Another war was only a matter of time. All the Chechens needed was to wait for a moment when Russia was at its absolute weakest. In 1999, they got the opportunity they had been dreaming of. Russia on the brink. If modern Russia ever faced a crisis of national survival, the first half of 1999 would undoubtedly be the most dangerous moment. After the First War, radical Chechen factions, led by the warlord Shamil Basayev, expanded their ambitions. They sought to establish a new Islamic state across the entire North Caucasus. And Russia, in 1999, looked ripe for the taking. The destructive consequences of the August 1998 financial crisis and the subsequent collapse of the ruble were in full view. To deflect blame, Yeltsin fired 3 prime ministers in a single year, bringing the central government to a virtual standstill. Yeltsin himself was in terrible shape, riddled with health problems and saddled with single-digit approval ratings. The State Duma, led by the Communist Party, was actively pursuing impeachment proceedings against him. This 1-2 punch of economic and political chaos left Russian society steeped in a profound sense of failure, humiliation, and despair. The Russian military situation had further deteriorated with its budget slashed by the financial crisis.
Morale and combat effectiveness were at an all-time low. This was the moment the Chechen militants had been waiting for. They escalated their kidnapping and terrorist activities and launched increasingly frequent cross-border raids, even recruiting jihadists from Central Asia and the Middle East for a full-scale invasion of neighboring Dagestan. Their plan was working. They had exposed Russia's weakness and undermined the authority of the more moderate Chechen government. But they overlooked one crucial detail. The Kremlin was about to get a new master, one who was nothing like Boris Yeltsin. Putin's counterstroke. Yeltsin's choice of Putin as prime minister and successor was an act of desperation. After years of misrule, Yeltsin's goal had shifted from building a legacy to simply saving his own skin. Putin knew that Yeltsin's endorsement was putting him on the hot seat. One wrong move, and the best-case scenario was being ousted. The worst was being prosecuted along with Yeltsin. He also knew that his predecessor had been fired not for being weak on Chechnya, but for not being strong enough. The moment he took office, Putin declared there would be no negotiations. Russia would launch a decisive military counterattack.
First, he used his background in the security services to overhaul the military's command structure. In the First War, command was split among multiple, uncoordinated agencies. The High Command, blinded by arrogance, had fatally underestimated the enemy. The core reason for the defeat was a lack of unified command in the rear and a lack of purpose on the front lines. Putin fixed both problems. He placed all combat forces under a single command structure, with himself at the top, ensuring there would be no wavering between fighting and talking. Next, he skillfully used a series of terrorist attacks inside Russia, particularly the infamous apartment bombings in September 1999, to reframe the military operation from an anti-secessionist civil war into a counter-terrorism cleanup. This clever shift not only eliminated any pretext for foreign intervention, but also ignited a sense of purpose and vengeance among the Russian troops. His "waste them in the outhouse" threat was a direct message to his soldiers: your enemies are terrorists, show no mercy. On October 1, 1999, Putin declared the separatist government illegal and ordered a ground defensive. This time, the Russian approach was patient and brutal. Instead of rushing in ground troops, they launched a months-long, overwhelming campaign of airstrikes and artillery. The Chechen president, Aslan Maskhadov, quickly realized that this new prime minister was different. He actually wanted them dead. Just 10 days into the bombing, Maskhadov offered to punish the rogue warlords and called for a ceasefire. But in Putin's eyes, when the enemy shows weakness, it means you're close to victory. He immediately rejected the peace offer. At the same time, Putin made a choice with profound long-term consequences. He decided to co-opt a key Chechen figure, Akhmad Kadyrov. As the chief mufti of Chechnya, Kadyrov was a top religious and clan leader. He recognized that the Russian military was far more determined and powerful this time around, and that continued resistance would only lead to the total destruction of Chechnya. Having already had public disagreements with Maskhadov, he reached out to Moscow. Putin shrewdly saw Kadyrov's value. He secretly promised that if Kadyrov sided with Moscow, he would become the supreme leader of the new Russian-controlled Chechnya. Kadyrov knew this promise would be kept if he delivered. He bet everything on Putin. His private militia acted as guides for the Russian army, not only greatly reducing their intelligence burden, but also turning a Russian-Chechen ethnic conflict into a civil war between pro-Russian and anti-Russian Chechens. This move fundamentally shattered the Chechen resistance from within. As the military situation grew clearer, Putin's approval ratings soared. In August 1999, his single-digit support was purely a product of Yeltsin's endorsement. By December, it had skyrocketed to an astonishing 70%. For Putin, the Russian presidency was now within his grasp. But becoming president of Russia was by no means the ultimate goal Putin was pursuing.